Okay, now welcome back. Now I want to talk about POAM. Now when we say POAM, what do we mean? It's a plan of action and milestone. POAM. Now whenever we are talking about POAM, what we are trying to refer to is that in an audit, we call it the corrective action plan. Now, POAM is a critical element of the IMF process. It is rare that a system is accredited with no vulnerability, because every system comes with a vulnerability. And so it is important for us to be able to track these vulnerabilities in a comprehensive way, or in a way that makes so much sense. We want to make sure that every system that we have, all the vulnerabilities within the environment, we are aware of it. For us to do that, we want to be able to document all of them down. So when the assessor is done with his assessment, all the findings that he comes up with, the controls that were other than satisfied, which will say that the controls that failed, all of them are vulnerabilities. Or it means that those controls are not working effectively. Because they are not working effectively, the system or any threat or event can take advantage of that and harm the system we are working on. And so we always say that a POAM is a living document. Why? Because it's been updated all the time. When a POAM is open, it never goes away. Because we want to be able to track it and say that 10 years ago, we had this vulnerability come up. This is how we treated it. These are the things that we did. Okay. Now, once a POAM is created, it never goes away. What do we mean by when a POAM is created, it never goes away? What we mean is that whenever a POAM is created, it allows the stakeholders to view or to have another eye, or to be able to understand or see the entire history of the system vulnerability whenever they desire. Many organizations use POAM to determine if the system is allowed to maintain its ATO. Why? Because the authorizing official will see the POAM, look at the vulnerabilities, or look at the findings that were documented in the POAM and say that some of these findings are high or critical. For critical findings, I can't allow them to be able to operate. Or for low findings, I can't allow them to operate. Now, because of that, then now the authorizing official will decide that, hey, I can't grant you an ATO for this. Can you go and remediate this before you can come back? Now, remember that POAM is required to be reported to FISMA and can alter the compliance status of the entire organization. What FISMA is requiring of us is that there has to be a POAM that has to be made. Once the POAM is made, it never goes away. The POAM is supposed to give us another view of how the system is and the vulnerabilities that are in the system. Now, this allows the stakeholders to have an entire history of the vulnerabilities in the environment. The reason why we report POAMs to FISMA, why? Imagine that you have an organization with 5 components, and one component has 20% of the entire organization's POAM. If all of those POAMs are in a failing status because they are not remediated within a specific period of time, one component can cause the entire organization to receive a failing score for the FISMA compliance. So because of one system, you can fail a whole FISMA compliance. And this level of visibility is enough to give an organization an undesired attention. So because of that, you want to make sure that you are reporting to FISMA. And you want to make sure that because you are reporting to FISMA, you need to be able to fix every vulnerability that is within the environment. Now, what are the responsibilities of the ISO during the POAM? Now, if you are an ISO, you are coordinating the performance of the vulnerability scans. And you are doing this with the system owner, the information system security manager, the security operations team, the scanning team, the developers team. Now, you are also working with the system owner and the information system security manager to develop, implement, and manage POAMs. You also have to make sure you are evaluating known vulnerabilities. You want to make sure that anything that has to do with the system personnel to ascertain if additional safeguards are needed. When you run a vulnerability scan, you realize that there are certain vulnerabilities. So you need to coordinate with various individual personnel to make sure that the vulnerability that you have actually found or the vulnerability identified can be remediated. Then you need to be able to verify all assets, hardware, software that are within your A&A boundary. Yes, because it is very necessary that you know the scope of your system. As an ISO, you need to know your scope. You need to be able to know that, yes, these are being scanned in accordance with the GISA or GSA policies and procedures. And the last one is that you work with the security operations team or the scanning team to resolve scanning issues. Because there could be issues like authentication, issues like unreachable hosts, but you need to find solutions to it. Now, what is the content of a POAM? A POAM contains the POAM number, the title, the description of the weakness, the severity, the SLA, that is the severity level agreement, that is whether it's 90 days, 30 days, or 60 days, the points of contact, the funding, then the milestone. And all of these things are being contained in a POAM. How is a POAM process like? Now, POAM starts with identifying vulnerabilities and deficiencies. When we say identifying vulnerabilities, what we mean is that, you see, in our environment, we are conducting a comprehensive assessment of the organization's information. What are we doing in that? To identify vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and deficiencies. Now, we also want to make sure that this assessment also may involve vulnerability scans, security assessments or security audits, risk assessments, gap assessments, and compliance evaluations. The second one that we have, we will say that you are assigning responsibility for remediation. And that is where we'll say that identify points of contact. Now, whenever you are identifying points of contact, what you are trying to do is that because of the findings that are likely to happen within your environment, you want to make sure that you are identifying various points of contact so that whenever there's a finding, somebody take over of it. So we'll say that prioritize findings, prioritize the identified vulnerabilities and deficiencies, and based on their severity, their potential impact on organization and the regulatory compliance requirements. And the second one will say that use risk assessment methodologies and prioritize findings considering factors such as likelihood, impact, and critical. The next one I want to talk about is that you say that you need to be able to do what? You need to be able to define your corrective action plan. When we say you are defining your corrective action plan, we are saying that for each identified vulnerability or deficiency, what is your plan to be able to correct it or to be able to remediate it? And that is something that we also need to be able to do. Then clearly describe what needs to be remediated. That is the vulnerability. The deficiencies, or including the technical controls, policy changes, you need to be able to label all that. Then we have talked about assigning roles and responsibilities, but this time around, assigning the roles and responsibilities with due dates. Why? If you don't add due dates to it, I can tell you that your stakeholders will take forever to respond to you. Because when you are in need of certain artifacts, remember, when you are GLC, they see you as someone that comes in to worry them. They are focused on doing their work, but they don't know that the work that they are doing, there is also a security aspect or there's a documentation aspect that needs to go on. So majority of the time, documentations is hard work for them. Now, document milestone and completion criteria. Now, you need to break down larger corrective action plan into smaller milestone or taxes to be able to track the process more effectively. Now, you need to be able to also define completion criteria for each milestone and to be able to ensure that the corrective action plan has been implemented satisfactorily. Why? Because if you don't document the milestone and if you don't break a bigger milestone to smaller ones, it makes it difficult for the stakeholders when they are attending and they will even forget about you. Then you go to the next one, and that is where we say that you create the POAM document. Now, when you are creating the POAM document, what we are saying is that you are compiling all identified vulnerabilities, prioritizing the findings, the corrective action plan, the responsibilities, the due dates, the milestone, the completion criteria into what we call a structured POAM document. And you want to make sure that the POAM is well organized, easy to understand, and accessible to relevant stakeholders. Now, implement and monitor progress. You need to be able to monitor the progress of the vulnerability program. If you cannot measure the progress of your vulnerability program or your event, then there is an issue that you need to correct. You need to begin implementing a corrective action plan. You need to regularly monitor the progress towards completing each corrective action plan. And you need to be able to update the POAM documents as tasks are completed or delayed. Then the last one I want to leave us with is that you need to be able to review and update regularly. Remember, your system is always not secured, but you need to be able to conduct regular reviews of your POAM, track the changes, the progress, the reassessment, and adjust your POAM based on changes in the organization's posture, and make sure that all new vulnerabilities and threats that are being found are being remediated on time. I can tell you that if you are following these steps that I'm telling you, you should be able to organize and create a comprehensive plan of action and milestone to be able to address identified vulnerabilities. The POAM serves as a roadmap for improving the security posture of every organization and cybersecurity company. I hope that this actually helped you. Now, let's do a quick summary of what we have. Now, we have talked about security assessment plan. We have talked about security assessment reports. We have also talked about POAM. We have talked about the examination, the interviewing, and also the testing.